Let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming, feedism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming to the show for the first time. We've got a very special guest today. Today we've got Philip.
Hello.
Hello. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Of course. How are you today, doll?
I am doing really well. I had a really busy week, but this is a perfect way to end off the week and so ready to talk about fat and everything related to it.
Oh, wonderful. That's very different for us on this podcast. We've never talked about fat before, actually. So this is a bit different for us, actually. We're very excited to have you on because, dear listeners, if you listen up here, bitches, if you don't know about Fatizen, fucking stop everything and go and check this out. And obviously, throughout this episode, we'll do links, it'll be in show notes, it'll be all of that. But this is a graphic novel series done by our fabulous guest here that is available for purchase through their website. And it's just wonderful. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we are so honored to have you here. So, you created this incredible graphic novel series called Fatizen, which is like Citizen, but it's fat. So, Fatizen. Can you tell our listeners what is Fatizen about?
Sure. So, Fatizen, the graphic novel, follows a fat woman and her family in a dystopic future America where the most powerful branch of government is the diet industry, and the rights of fat citizens are slowly diminished by the newly enacted anti-fat regulation called the endomorphic laws. And those laws slowly erode any civil protections for the obese until all rights for fat people are eliminated, resulting in Fatizen status, which results in permanent incarceration in a local calorie camp. And we follow one woman and her family as they stand up for their rights and they inspire hope and a revolution. It's not a Gainer-specific story, but there are many Gainer elements in this universe.
I mean, I picked up on that right away. Everything from just her simple approach to just the joy of food. You know, Delilah Palladino was just this buxom babe who, even from the first panel, was just so charming and insistent when she went to the grocery store and was like, oh, I am looking for this. I'll take this, thank you. And then this little bitch counter beep trying to tell our iconic heroine that she can't have what she needs to have. And she's like, how? Well, you know what? We finna go elsewhere. Thank you. She is, even from the first panel, living her authentic life. Whether or not this woman is a gainer / feedie, she is just confident in her body, knows what she wants, and she's got her boys in tow. And any moment that she addresses them and leads them, you get that sense that she is that mother really protecting them and saying, come on kids, don't you worry about all this. We're going to go somewhere else and we're going to get what we need. And she's not putting out bad vibes. She is literally just a big, beautiful woman trying to function in this world. And you get that from page one. It's fabulous.
I appreciate that rundown. I wanted to create a character that people could relate to. And I tried desperately to create a character that was not me in drag. I wanted, and it was tough.
I was
really
almost
tough.
about to ask that question. Like, is she basically like a, in a way, I'm sure she's your avatar, but like, was it kind of like you were trying to create a female version of yourself, or was it just, that I was just about to ask that.
It was partly that, her responses, what drives her, I think are a lot of me. As I think any writer, each character a writer writes is part of themselves. But I wanted to really understand how a woman thinks. And so I interviewed dozens of women in my life, including my mother.
Oh.
And I would ask them questions about different scenarios that this character, Delilah, would be in. And I was flabbergasted by some of the responses because that is not how my friends told me how they would respond, is not what I would have done in that situation. So I really had to get into the headspace of a woman, of a fat woman, of a heterosexual woman. And that informed the character so much because I would have done things a little differently, but I followed the guidance from these individuals that helped me understand how a woman may process things and how that can be different than a man can. So that was really important to get that voice right. I wanted to make sure that some of her responses were genuine as a mother, as a woman, and then as an activist.
It came through so succinctly, and really felt like it didn't feel like to say people I knew. It felt specifically like women that I knew.
I was just going to say one of the hallmarks of a great character is that they're timeless, that it doesn't matter when the story is set, like the struggles and the thoughts and ideas and like everything that makes up a character can be pulled out of whatever time period they're in and put in another one, and it's still relevant. And that's what I think is great about Delilah, is that she's a relevant character. I know that you wrote this, it was over 10 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. So, over a decade ago, but still relevant today, still topical.
Thank you. It was so many elements went into creating this character, including her last name, Palladino, which comes from the word paladin, which is a knight. And that's exactly how I saw her navigating in this universe.
I mean, really, again, it all shines through so succinctly. We did have a listener question, which was going to ask, like, who is she based on? And I love that she's an amalgamation of all these, like, wonderfully character-driven, empowered women from your own life. But I did want to ask, reading through it, when one of the characters, I'm trying not to spoil things for people who haven't read it, but there's like a scene where they're in Vegas at a buffet, and I clocked in one of the panels, there was a tan gentleman with a little goatee, a little short crop of hair, big old bubba with some glasses, and I want to know, was that you putting yourself as the physical representation in the piece?
Because my husband is the artist, Mason Arrigo, he drew us into that scene. Yes, you picked up on that. That is my husband and I sitting at the table.
Listen,
that's not uncommon. That's not uncommon. I mean, even Beau DeMaio had him and his boyfriend in X-Men '97. Like they were in the crowd in Genosha. So like, not uncommon for that to happen. I think Neil Gaiman has been drawn into a few of his own comics a couple of times.
It's references, and I that's probably one of the most fun aspects of like visual artistic medium, is those little reference points to things that exist outside and beyond, and it creates these through lines within the universe. I think it's fabulous. So listen, you'll need to be reading Fatizen, because there were some gorgeous characters all up in that. Your husband is a very talented artist.
Thank you.
Round of applause for that.
I do have to add that my husband did have some fun in it. In the opening scene in the parking lot, when Delilah is pulling into the grocery store. I don't know if you see, there's a reference to Jane and George Jetson.
I did. I caught that. Yeah.
Okay. And then toward the end of part one, when Delilah is in calorie camp, she's talking to the virtual reality intake counselor, Serena, and he drew Serena from Bewitched into that character. So he had some fun, and of course that happens all the time. So
it's fabulous. I thought that the Judy Jetson reference was because for people who haven't picked it up yet, that's so like retro 60s futuristic, with the hover cars and all these reference points. And I don't know, I think because most people in my age bracket probably haven't seen much of this retro futuristic 60s since seeing the Jetsons on like Cartoon Network reruns. And so there's this discourse, this comparison constantly, I think, between what is ostensibly a very fun outlook of the future, which was laden with joy, contrasted with this truly evil idea that had permeated society. And just the way that over 3 volumes, it starts from something so small and so simple, these BMI calculators that say, you can't have that. That's not a part of what you're allowed to have, all the way through to where the series has gone by that book. And it's something that really sits with you as you read it, because even within the art, you sense that shift over time. Like, it is very palpable. It is felt, it is seen, and it's almost something you can taste as it goes along. Certainly some of those scenes depicting food at the end, I found myself salivating, where I was like, we're all in this wasteland together, and now we're at the Vegas buffet, and now, bitch, I need to go to a Vegas buffet, goddammit.
I have to say the buffet, that it was an actual building that I went to a New Year's party, Paul Anka's Jubilation. And it existed on that street in Las Vegas in the 80s when I was there. And when I was trying to figure out how do I pull this into someplace that seemed real, that was over the top magical when I was there, and that is how I identified that. And throughout the book, I really tried to immerse the reader in reality. So I took actual places that I was familiar with, so that people, if they're in LA, they would get it, and if they're not in LA, then they would still be able to appreciate the setting. But it was real important in order to tell the story that the reader feel grounded in reality, because when you can actually suspend your disbelief and get the reader to buy into the universe that you've created, it makes it even more powerful of a read.
If I can jump ahead to a listener question, because we're talking about the way that the comic was drawn and constructed and all that. You said that your husband was the artist, and I noticed while reading it as a comic book fan, I noticed like references to things written by Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman, and I thought that the art style was very reminiscent of Jack Kirby. Do you know, were these influences on the way that he drew it?
Absolutely. You've named some of the artists that he adores. And my husband's, the way he draws is very 1960s. It's very period. And so, of course, that influence comes through, but he will be ecstatic to know that you picked up on that in his creation.
Well, like when I was reading through it and I saw the smiley face in the background of, there was a panel where it was like Mimi was going to therapy, the character Mimi, and I saw all these smiley faces and I'm like, oh, is that, immediately my mind went to The Watchmen. And Neil, I mean, I kind of saw a few things peppered in here and there that I think Neil Gaiman would have written, but then like looking at the art style, I was like, oh, this is clearly Jack Kirby. Like this looks just like something out of the Silver Age of Marvel.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, you saw it, and he's just going to love that you picked up on that. And I'm sure other readers have as well.
That's fabulous. So listen, comic book fans, now y'all do not have a goddamn excuse. Y'all need to be purchasing your copy. Go to the show notes immediately. Buy this series. This was a fantastic read. My God. Now listen, we want to take it back just for now. We briefly spoken about this, and I know you had mentioned that the impetus for Fatizen came from like a prose moment from 2015. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So back in 2010, I was taking an undergraduate writing course, and we had to create 25 pages of fiction. And I thought, I had always been a fan of Judge Dredd and the League of Fatties. And I wrote 25 pages of fan fiction. And for those that aren't familiar with the League of Fatties, they're a kamikaze-like group who are a criminal organization following an apocalyptic war that results in harsh food rationing. And they even would commit suicide on food traveling across the country to get the food to stay fat. And I thought, what a better theme to write on. But when I got into grad school, I had to submit 25 pages, and I was admitted to the fiction wing of the school. I had applied for nonfiction, and the only thing I had to go was this fan fiction of Judge Dredd. And so that became my sole project and my manuscript. And then eventually the prose novel, Fatizen 24602. and hence the journey began.
And what from that inspired you to delve into authorship beyond that, like taking it from this beginning kernel and really seeing it through to 3 fully fleshed out graphic novels?
Well, the 3 graphic novels are the entire prose book, which is broken into 3 parts. As I was writing it, I met my husband, and my husband is an incredible artist. And he started drawing the characters that that I had created. And I would tell him, no, Delilah doesn't look like that. She would look like this. And no, her children would look like this. And so by the time the book went to print in 2015, he asked, well, I just want to write a graphic novel about this. And I told him, let's do it. Let's try it. And so he just went to town and full time worked on the graphic novels. And with each scene, it helped me in my own writing process because I saw that when you adapt a graphic novel from a book, you can't put every line of dialogue into the graphic novel. And he would tell me, I can't have 10 pages of talking heads. We have to synthesize this down to the bare elements to get the message across and to make sure that the reader doesn't get bored with heads turning cell to cell for 10 pages. So I realized, one, I overwrite a little bit, as I think many authors do. And so I learned how to improve my own writing through the process of creating the graphic novels, which I am just so thankful for in the end. And then, of course, you saw the final product.
I mean, it's interesting to me. I think we've talked about this a little bit, Tim, when it comes to art, especially. You know, we review documentaries about Getting a Fatizen. We've looked at a couple of different things, like, and Gainer artists as well. And what I find interesting is that collaborative element, you know. So really, Fatizen is not, I suppose, just something that is just of you or just of your husband. It really is that combination of the two, and it creates something brand new, you know, greater than the sum of its parts. And it really carries across, you know, that element of paring things down. In so many spaces, it feels like that comic has great pacing, where the action scenes show me every bit of that minutia that I'm needing to see in the battle, and then those moments that are just deep emotional intimacy, it's also giving me that. And wherein, you know, the wide shots, and there's a moment that happens very early on in book 2 that is so traumatic to read, and I'm like, no, I can't believe this happened. How dare you do this to me? But no, it was fabulous. Oh my god. It's just such an incredible piece. And to that point, I want to reference here as well, because as a response to also producing this fantastic graphic novel series, you and your husband co-own a production house, correct?
That is correct, actually. And it started with the graphic novel. We thought about going the traditional route of speaking to different publishing companies, but having learned the publishing industry, I realized we wanted to do it our own way. We wanted to keep everything as is. We didn't want to have to change anything. And that often happens when you have an actual publishing house representing you. So we created our own imprint, which is Embonpoint Publishing, or Embonpoint, as it's pronounced, because Embonpoint means plump in French. And so that was established. And since 2017, you know, we have a couple different titles. We have A Marable Mule, which is a female detective, very, very tongue-in-cheek. And then the Fatizen line. And I have learned it's a whole lot of work to be a publisher, but it's been incredible experience understanding how everything works on the other side of the process.
No, that's fabulous. I mean, and again, this is that kind of fat excellence that I love to see in the world. You know, I don't just want to see, and there's no shade to queer listeners who it's like, oh, like another underwear company. Like, yes, love that. Love a caftan, absolutely. But also, what about fat literature? What about fat music? What about dances? What about, and not just underwear and caftans, but full-blown motherfucking fashions on bigger bodies. I just want to see fat fucking everything. And it makes me so happy that this exists. So I think any person who thinks themselves a potential prospective author should maybe look to getting in contact with you and thinking about how we can start to really build up the world of fat involved literature. Because personally, I'd love more good shit to read. I really, really would. I want to ask here, what has the reception been like from readers? And I don't know if you can really break it down as in, responses from straight size readers versus plus size readers, but just overall, what has that reception been like?
It has been a little bit of a mixed bag. It's been a mix from wonderful to shocking. For the most part, most readers have seen the connection to the Holocaust and what happens when we as a society define our fellow human beings as other, and we dehumanize them to the point that genocide is not such a bitter pill to swallow. And that happens when a subset of our society is devalued and elimination is the only viable option in the end. There have been those individuals who have come out of the woodwork to bring down the ratings and reviews of the book. There's a segment of our population that are very anti-fat. And it's a small segment, but they're incredibly active and they can work to bring down works of fat positive literature, at least from my own experience in the writerly world. And although they exist, I like to focus on the positive aspects. Those individuals who have read the book and had an incredible awakening about, wow, something like this exists, that a character exists that is not ashamed of her fat. I also have to mention that in writing this, I found that although knowing a lot of individuals come to stories like this with their own baggage, I didn't realize how many people have fat issues. And that should be a given. But several of the people that I know who read the book would tell me that I had such a hard time with this because I felt like my mother was going to run through the door and say, "What are you reading?" Or, it made me realize that I have my own issues with eating. And so it triggered a lot of individuals, a lot more so than I realized that could happen. So it has been across the board, but for the most part, people have been able to enjoy the characters, appreciate the story, that there is enough room in the world for everyone. And that is the most important message that I wanted to get out there, that we can all be happy. We can all coexist together, regardless of size. But I wanted to take that point to the ultimate conclusion of what happens if we dehumanize fat people. What would society look like? And in the story, as you read, the further that you push fat underground, something else emerges from below. And it becomes a little more twisted, a little more disfigured. And you can't eliminate who people are. They're going to continue existing, whether you want to see them or not. And if you push them hard enough, they're going to push back. And that's what happens, obviously, in the end. And I will say, to that point, trying to figure out how to get a 700-pound person on the battlefield took a little bit of planning. And that was an important thing to set early on. How do we get to that point? Because I wanted to have my 700-pound warriors on the battlefield. And I think I achieved that. So.
Just gonna say, about people that are triggered, by stories like this. It's kind of unavoidable because any media that's put out there could potentially trigger someone with a story that is difficult to tell. But what I really appreciate about this whole thing is if you zoom out from the plot of the story and you look at the bigger picture, and I know it's set in a dystopian future, but it's really not that far-fetched. It's not. With the way that governments are always trying to solve these problems. Oh, let's solve the war on drugs. Let's solve the war on obesity, blah, 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 blah. I don't see this being that far-fetched. And the character of Mimi specifically reminded me of that video that you showed me, James, of that round table where it was like three of them were overweight, three of them were fit, and the one guy who was so toxic, who was so mean-spirited and just awful to all of the other members on that panel. It was like, it's like this stuff doesn't evolve in a vacuum, right? Like these ideas get perpetuated until you get to someone who is like that, who is just militantly hating everything that is different to them, and so like that's what I appreciate about stories like this, is that they're really not that far-fetched. It's not impossible to think that we could end up in a future like this.
100%. And I've got to say here on that notion of triggering, how beautiful to have created a piece that for people who have an internalized struggle that maybe they have buried so successfully to the point where they don't even realize, and they read this piece and it transports them immediately back to being a teenager as if they're hiding things from their parents. It transports them to a place that makes them go, oh, holy shit, I am in the middle of a reckoning. Why do I dislike this character so much? It's because she represents everything that I struggle with, everything I stood against, or everything that I've decided is wrong internally but never thought to talk out. And this creates a space for someone to work that out in real time. It's such an incredible thing. And certainly to what you were saying, Tim, again, I referenced this at the beginning of the story. It's only something very, very simple. BMI calculators that are on the wrist that says, hey, your doctor said you're too fat, you're not allowed to have this food. We have the sugar tax here in the UK where you already have to pay 14p extra on items that they have decided are a high sugar content. Here on this call,
they regulate your drink sizes too, don't they?
They regulate drink sizes. Here on this call, I am drinking a Coca-Cola, but Coca-Cola is not allowed to be on special on almost any retailer. But you know what they will put on special is Diet Coke and Coke Zero, which ironically enough, don't actually have things that make them healthier. They just have aspartame and other fucking bullshit, right? So it's this picking and choosing. And then you think about what they're doing now with cigarettes. It's like the cost of cigarettes has increased so much because all they can do to dissuade people from smoking is to make it literally unaffordable. And King Charles just signed into law sometime this year. The new, like, I forget what the technical term for this, but it's a staggering law. So it's law applying to people of a certain age. Law where it's like, oh, you can't drink if you're under 21. That's like a firm law where you can at least age up and eventually be able to drink. This law was signed in that people who are currently the age of 14 will never legally be allowed to buy cigarettes. And that age law will just increase until the point that there won't be anyone left alive in 100 years who will legally be allowed to buy cigarettes in this country. And I understand that maybe that's a little bit of a different thing. However, to Tim's point of this shit is closer to reality than we like to give it credit for, it very much is. And certain tones that were very much in these books are present in our world today.
Well, and speaking of triggering, you just triggered me again with something because of this whole smoking law and all this other crap. Look, this is going to be a bit of a rant, but when it comes to things where the government wants to regulate what you can eat, what you can drink, where you can go, like the healthcare that you can, all this stuff, they present it with this idea of, oh, we just want you to live longer. Okay, I am a person who has worked with the elderly for over 10 years. That has been the major population of patients that I have worked with. And I can tell you, I don't want to live to be as old as some of these people. I'm sorry. I know how this may sound, and I certainly don't want to come off as being callous to the idea of getting older, but I have seen what happens when, and admittedly, I work in a nursing home, and not every elder person ends up in a nursing home. But from what I have seen, it is not a life that I want to try and achieve. And every time I look around, I think this is what everyone says we're supposed to be aiming for. This is the ultimate, that everyone wants us to live long. They want us to live and to be, 80, 90, 100 years old. I don't want to, not from what I've seen.
It was a challenge when I was writing Fatizen to look that far ahead when I saw everything happening around me at the time changing in terms of curbing our personal choices, our access to things, our access to supersized meals at McDonald's. I saw all of that, and I realized, I have to put this in the future to get some distance from where we're at. But there were so many things already happening around the world that I realized I didn't think that far ahead. And I'm not as much of a futurist as I wanted to be. I didn't really intend to go into science fiction, even though this book has been labeled science fiction. It's speculative fiction, and there really isn't a category in bookstores or with publishing companies called speculative fiction. So people have come to Fatizen looking for that science fiction edge, but in reality, it's very light science fiction. It's more speculative of what's going to happen. And I realized so many things have already happened now that I was talking about in the book when I started writing it across the world about the curtailing of what we have access to. And that's unfortunate. And I don't know when that's going to change, if it's going to change, but it's something that I think people should be aware of, that choices, when you limit choices, when you start telling people no, they will find a way to get it, even if it ends up being on the black market. And that's why I put that into the book as well, to show that if you tell someone you can't get something, they will find a way to get it. And there will be those subsets of society that, like the mob or the gang warfare, if there's money to be made somewhere, people will access whatever you've denied them. And that's important to point out. I felt important to make clear that you can take it away from this hand, but the other hand is going to find a way to get what it needs.
Can I just say to that point as well, I'm thinking of that scene where she goes to the black market neighborhood to pick up fucking groceries. Two things that really stand out to me there. One, just even though they're obviously like simple depictions, you can tell in the graphics very clearly that the food quality in the black market is higher. Because it looks more, like the presentation of the vegetables just at the very least look leafier, and the meat like had that sheen to it. Whereas like the little parcels that you see in the grocery store are very clinical, exact, measured, nothing special, nothing over the top, and everything had that grey beige moment to it. And something else I think is very important to reference here, though neither Tim nor myself are Latine people, there are several many moments in the piece through the series that delve very specifically into use of Spanish and have a lot of what I would interpret based on the presentation as very, localized Spanish themes. So when she goes to the black market, there is a lot of that language being used, and you can see her really bellying up to the table, squaring shoulders to talk to these manses to let them know, no, I'm here. Don't you look me sideways, bitch. I'm here for the good shit. You don't know who you're messing with. And there, again, it's that element of like, what a cool bitch. Like, she just, in so many ways, unflappable, unfazed. And I think so many of us like have women like that in our lives, women who have really just had to rise to whatever occasion they find themselves in, and they just go, well, this is the situation, square it up. What are we going to do? And that's such mother energy. It's wonderful. Again, people, read the damn books. It's fantastic. Once again, reminding you, go to the show notes, find the links, click, buy, all of it. Now, I did want to ask, because we had another listener question. You mentioned, a lot of this required you to be looking into the future. Delving a little bit into the past, the BMI is obviously where a lot of this story narrative started. Many people do not realize that the widespread use of the BMI as a way of measuring size, obesity, health, and insurance, especially in America, only came into effect in the mid to late 90s. Was that particular moment in history an influence for you as translating that to the novel, or something that has really held an effect in your own life?
Absolutely. When the BMI was introduced, it was such a horrific way to start measuring people's unhealthiness. And when people started to use that to classify more worthwhile, less worthwhile, and that stayed with me, I think, from the beginning. In 1990, I was, in my 20s, and I just thought, well, from the gainer point of view, of course, I look at it from the opposite view of how it is being used by standard society. But looking at how people were using it to qualify how worthy they were as a person. It just to actually have a measurement system to make you less human was just awful. And it was something that stayed with me, I think, obviously, until I started writing the book where I wanted to address you may have this scale, it may have been created, but you are no less worthy no matter where you are on that scale. It stayed with me from the very beginning when I first learned about it when I was younger.
It's one of these moments, and I know, Tim, you reference this a lot, that we don't always get to have, more established members of the community on the podcast. And I really hope that we can see more of that through season 4 and onwards, because, it's wonderful as a young person getting to discover gaming through cartoons of the 90s and leaning into it, and especially in this era of body positivity and, in essence, privilege of access that people like yourself didn't get to have, and that there are very real moments in our history that were not that long ago that caused such trauma for people. And I think it's so important that we reflect on, while all of this is fun and we love what we're doing, we stand on the shoulders of people who really experienced hardship in this area of life. And we need to give thanks to it. We need to give respect to it. And I think Fatizen really is timeless, like Tim was saying, not just because of the art style and the messaging, but because everything from it is referencing things that have come before and things that may very well come after. It is quite an incredible thing you've achieved with it, honestly. I wanted to ask you, talking a little bit more about gaming specifically, do you feel that the work of Fatizen has influenced your gaming journey in any way?
I put myself out there publicly as a gainer, starting with an article I wrote for the Big Ad magazine back in 1992 called Anatomy of a Gainer. And I wanted to help spread the word that wanting to be fatter was not something you had to hide, claiming your gainer identity as being an activist because it's not accepted publicly. And even with the advances in today's environment, choosing to be fat is choosing to be other. And as we all know, it's just not easy with that label. And, claiming my gainer identity has risks within the fat liberation movement. It's not overly welcoming to gainers and encouragers. And in fact, it's almost taboo. There continues to be a stigma for gainers in the fat lib universe. With Fatizen, I realized the quirkiness of the broader fatosphere. There exist individuals, key people in the fat lib movement who are very anti-gaining, or in the straight world, feeders and feedies. It seems that any hint of gainer content or presence is rejected outright. So it could be a very fine line to navigate the fat lib world and being a gainer. And I'd like to believe that barrier began to erode one day, but it's still very firm, very present.
I mean, we wanted to ask, as a self-described fat liberationist, what does that mean in the space as a gainer? And I'm grateful for you sharing that, because I don't think, again, things we don't get to talk about too terribly much, because I don't know that so many people in the community identify with fat liberation and really want to move themselves forward through that. And I know you've obviously expressed that there's still hardships in there, there's still struggles. Do you feel like you're seeing more gainers and feedies in that space, or is it still kind of a bit of a lone effort there?
So it is changing whether the anti-gainer, anti-feeder individuals want to see it or not. First, just acknowledging the wealth of gainers that are coming up to age, that are coming out there, that are visible, that are making it known. We are here, we are present. First, that I just love. Every time I see someone new, my heart is just filled with joy to see more individuals in our community. I think as a result of the number of people, the sheer volume of gainers in the world, resulting in artists as well and writers. As a community, we are permeating that fatosphere. We are entering that other world. And so I know I know specifically many, many artists visual artists and writers who are, I want to say, seeping into that fatosphere, and I love it. I love the fact that there are individuals who don't want us in their space, but we are there. We are there already. We have been there before, but we've had to keep our mouths shut to not make it so explicit that is who we are. But we are there, and we're going to continue to be there. And I think just in the volume of who we are as gainers and encouragers, that we continue to be part of the bigger world outside of our little gainer community. And that will change. People move on, people die, the next generation comes into being. So yeah, there is change. I've seen it. I'm aware of it, and I know that certain individuals aren't aware of who is what, but it is changing, and I'm grateful to see that.
That's beautiful. And this inspires because there's a listener question here. Near the beginning of volume 2, maybe more specifically, Mark and Kevin, Delilah's kids, they seem to represent fatter people at different points in that journey of fat activism, I suppose you could say. I want to ask you, do you feel like these days you're seeing more Marks or more Kevins about?
I think there's both. First, I wanted to show a character evolution, and I did that with Mark, in that we understand in book 2 he has some issues with his size, and his brother just pushes him to say, you need to get past this. This is who I am. This is who we are. And I wanted the journey of Mark, that arc of the character, to have an evolution. So by the end of part 3, we see him on the front line, and he has claimed his authentic self of no qualms. I can understand. I know what's happening. I can see the division in society, and I'm willing to take that next step, to make a difference. I see both types of people in our world. I know there are the well-adjusted chubs, the gainers that have no problem claiming this is who I am, this is my identity. But there are many, many people that are, I want to say, a little more challenged in embracing who they are. I've known many people, both older and younger than me, that have had a really hard time in that journey of self-acceptance, in understanding who they are. Well, maybe not who they are, but why they have these feelings. And they struggle with accepting that. And sometimes some very public gainers have a moment of realization. If I don't lose weight now, I'm just going to keep growing. And they reach that threshold. They're on the precipice of, if I gain any more weight, it's going to take me down a path I don't want to go to. And so there were those individuals that have ended up having the surgery or massive weight loss, and try and turn themselves around and deny that part of themselves that gives them so much pleasure. And that is not, I don't think that's ever going to end. I think because of our background, because of how some of us are raised, the environments that we live in, society as a whole, none of us can get away from the messages of fat equals bad. I think it takes a certain mindset to be able to put that aside and embrace who you are and be everything that you're meant to be and pursue that level of happiness. But not everyone is at that level. I think, however we're built, each of us individually, we don't all have that ability to push aside those messages and just be who we are as gainers and encouragers. So I don't think we'll ever get away from, those two branches of well-adjusted and struggling with who we are. And so I just hope through through this story, for those who choose to read it, that understanding you can get there. It may take a little bit of work, but you can be who you are. You can embrace all of the darker parts of yourselves. And for those of us who are, I call dark gainers, who look at 700-800 pounds as desirable, including what may come as a result of choosing that level of fatness, that it's okay. Whatever you want to be is okay. And I think in society, we're at a place now where we're understanding the need to accept where the person is at, from pronouns to, how they identify themselves and their sexuality. And I think we'll get to the point eventually where people can embrace that inner part of themselves more freely without feeling that judgment. But I think it's harder for gainers to come out of the closet sometimes as a gainer than any other aspect of themselves. And I just think that is something we have yet to overcome.
Weren't you saying on one episode, or maybe this was just a conversation between you and me, James, where you were talking about how like you can be skinny, you can be fat, you can love yourself in either way, but and it's okay to want to go from fat to skinny, but the one forbidden taboo area is going from skinny to fat.
Right. So I call this, ironically, the perceptions held adjective traits paradigm, the fat paradigm. And it's interesting because a paradigm is a living spectrum within which people can move up and along. Fat, skinny, it doesn't matter like what number on the scale or size you want to equate it to because everyone's got a different vision, so it doesn't matter. Skinny has always been accepted. There's never been a time in history in which that has not been fine. Fat you could give an honorary tick to because we're working on it. But as a living paradigm, people shift. Going from fat to skinny has never been a problem, but going from skinny to fat exists in permanence as an issue. And this is also upheld by fat liberation. And I want to say this here because someone asked me recently, oh, how do you bring the bear and gainer communities together? Because many gainers exist in the bear space, and how do you get people to be more sociable? Truth of the matter is, the only major difference between a gainer and a bear is that a gainer intentionally got that way. A bear typically gets there by accident. Oh, this is genetics, or this is life, or whatever, and here I am, and both can be appreciated. But when someone says, I like bears, but I don't like gainers, what you are stating is that you specifically dislike intentional growth, but you are attracted to unintentional growth. And in our society, the only narratives we have for unintentional growth are negative. You have an eating disorder. You're self-loathing and want to kill yourself with food. You've experimented with medication. You're out of control. You're hopeless, helpless, loser, idiot. All of these horrible, horrible ideas. So I find it very interesting because people do get fat. In order for a human being to be fat, they had to go from being not as fat to fatter. Even if you were a fat child into a fat adult, you had to become fatter as you grew, right? Which means, much like all other forms of, trying to make trans people disappear, trying to make people of color disappear, no, they're not going to disappear. They still exist, my dude. You're just trying to shame them out of existence, but they will always be there, which means they will arrive there through your lens of shame. Which means every single fat person is still becoming fat, but just not through any kind of positivity. And when fat liberation actively says gaining is bad, fetism is bad, we reject this, fat liberation factually is stating you are allowed to become fat, but only if you walk through the predetermined lens of horror, shame, and negativity. We will accept your fatness so long as you hate yourself. And that is the truth of it.
So if you're a completely broken human being, then
you're on
it's like they're totally fine with it. Yeah, you can be big, but you have to be miserable.
So this is why gaining and fat liberation and fetism and everything that we are is required as a part of this movement. It is a non-negotiable. Because quite clearly, fat bitches are out here struggling to find a reason to give a damn about themselves. We arrive in the space representing joy. This is joy incarnate. Every pound, every curve, every swerve, every feature of my flesh. This is hard-won, hard-worked, and well-loved. And in some fat cases, well-worn, because, she get out on the town, she has a good time because people love what they like. But we are needed. And what I loved about Fatizen is that even though, as you say, it wasn't explicitly gainer, in so many ways it represents gaining in the most beautiful way that I think people need to consume it, in that it is representative of confidence and an unwavering belief in the self. I am what I am. And whether you want to call me fat or obese or any other term in between, you are not going to hold me back from the food that I want to eat, living the life that I want to live, giving love to my children or to my community, and standing up for what is right. Fatizen does it all. And I just want you to know, not only did you succeed in doing it, but people see it and respect it and receive it so fully. That is what you have done. Thank you for Fatizen.
Thank you, James. I truly appreciate your words. I love how succinctly you summed up the issues that are pervasive, whether it's in the fat lib movement, or in the gainer movement. We are here and we are proud of who we are. And that is what I wanted to come through in Fatizen. And I'm so happy you saw that, in that we can be proud of who we are. We can be proud of every pound, of every curve. And whether we want to be larger or stay where we're at, it is all about embracing who you are without reservation and moving forward in life, pursuing whatever you want to have in your life, whether it's, an artist or a family or in a profession. The only thing that holds you back is your own fear. You can be as successful as you want as a gainer, as a fat man, as a truly huge fat man. You can find that happiness. The only thing holding you back is your own fear. And I believe that so earnestly, that we allow the messages from others to hold us back in our lives. And when you can let that go, when you can just let that baggage drop and blossom, it's a wonderful feeling. It doesn't have to be painful, but it's apprehension, and it's not knowing how to do that. We've allowed, without going into a whole other tangent, we've allowed religion and certain messages that we're brought up with to keep us from abandoning that baggage. And it's a journey, and sometimes therapy can help, but anything we can do to help each other embrace who we are, create safe spaces, put the messaging out there that you are fine as you are. You are fine if you want to be bigger, and if you want to be smaller, that's fine too, as long as it comes from within, as long as you're pursuing your own happiness and you're not afraid to let that out.
It's funny you mentioned religion, because sometimes James will get on my case because I haven't been Catholic in 25 years, but that Catholic guilt still sometimes seeps into certain corners of my life, and James has to remind me to let it go. And I'm like, you don't understand. They beat it into your head. Like, it's really difficult to shed that stuff.
I was raised Catholic. I was in the seminary for 3 years studying the priesthood. So when I introduce religion into Fatizen, and yes, readers who have not read it, I address religion in that not so lightly. I was addressing my own baggage, which I have a lot of, as I think we all do. And I wanted to make it clear that people use religion for whatever purpose they want. You can pursue it for, the glory and the angels and the singing, and then you can use it to keep others, under your thumb. And it's important to be aware of what's happening. It's important to understand what these messages are and how they're employed in our lives and by government or by the church. It's important to understand the framework of our lives so that we can choose to let it not bother us, to move past it, or to find a way to compartmentalize and make it work in our lives. I'm not anti-religion. I'm anti-authoritarian, and I have friends who are very religious, and I love them. And I don't speak out against religion as it is. I just think any man-made organization can be used in very negative ways, and it's just important to understand what's really happening. And understanding it helps process and put it into context so that you can live your life happier.
100%. I mean, this brings to mind, we did an episode, Obesity in Religion, which was a roundtable episode last season, which I thought was very powerful, talking about how people approaching from different faiths, it affects how we can operate within our bodies. Even people who aren't gainers, to exist as fat in the world is inherently political, but also exists in conjunction with religion and race and gender and so many other factors that exist. And it worries me sometimes that in the community, it feels like people at large don't wish to unpack this kind of thing. I get it, we're all here having a good time, but also we do exist in the world. And when you're not logged into Grommr and you're not posting pics on Insta or Twitter or your OnlyFans or anywhere else, you are a fat bitch in society. And society has something to say about that. So community, self-understanding and self-respect are so crucial and important. And something like Fatizen can really help give someone a framework for seeing themselves, and understanding where you could be within all of this. I want to ask here, and I feel like we talked around so many incredible things with Fatizen, but if you could sum up, like, what is the greatest lesson you have learned from just the entire process of writing and distributing? What is the most important thing you've learned from creating Fatizen?
In writing my book, I learned a lot about myself, in plotting and where I wanted to take the story. I really had to examine where I'm at with my own fat, my comfortability level. I realized when I wrote this that I'm making a certain proclamation to the world, and I had to be sure what that was. As long as I've been out as a gainer, I've tried to put my thoughts out there. But when you're writing a novel, it's so important to understand your motivation, understand why this scene has what is the message per scene, per chapter, because it's going to live long after I'm gone. And I wanted the message to be thorough. I wanted to be sure that I wasn't just bashing one segment or another, or bashing at all. I wanted to present, this is what could happen. You can never eliminate parts of our society because they will spring up in other areas. And I wanted to show that you can't eliminate parts of people. You can't force people to be something they're not. And, I learned more about myself, about how I really felt about fat, how I felt about the anti-fat movement, about people, denying others, the right to live. And I feel like I was able to put that into a cohesive message in a story that lets people see what a world can be like when you force it to be something it's not, and as a microcosm of that, what happens to the person when they're not allowed to be who they are. And neither one of those on the macro level or micro level is desirable, when you subjugate, the person, at the most inner core level. So
this has been such a wonderful episode. You are someone who, because of Fatizen, has been so successful in, sustaining yourself with this piece and with the work that you're now doing. For artists, writers, people in our community who are maybe looking to similarly sustain themselves on their creative endeavors, what is the biggest piece of advice you might give to someone?
I think embracing your passion as a creative is essential to happiness. I think incorporating our passion as gainers and encouragers helps to make our journey more fulfilling. However, just looking at statistics, in terms of writing, less than 3% of writers can make a living solely on their writing. And that sounds discouraging, but it should never deter an artist from pursuing their passions. I've chosen a career in social work, and then now I'm working as an analyst with the local health department. And I wish I could say I can write all day, but my own reality requires me to work the day job. We need to live and got bills to pay, and I don't want to struggle with finances as a starving artist. So until my writing can pay the bills, I found a career in civil service where I can't be fired for growing too fat. It allows me to write, and on that end, I stay organized in my non-work time. I schedule my writing time, and I stick to my writing schedule. It's not enough to have dreams. You have to work damn hard to make those dreams happen. And even a piece of writing that seems effortless to the ear may have taken days, weeks, or months, or longer to perfect. But most importantly, don't give up. Keep working on your art. Let it flow and never stop creating in spite of anything anyone else has to say about it.
And as a final question, what's next for Fatizen, for Embonpoint Productions? What's next for you in the creative space?
I have been in the Fatizen universe essentially since 2010. And I have loved it. I've loved what I've created. I loved what's followed. But my next project is nonfiction, non-fat. I'm actually working on a book on the intersection between the Mexican Revolution and my family. It's a huge project. I've been interviewing family members for years. I took a trip to Mexico to see where we came from in the state of Guanajuato. And I've been doing research about the revolution because I honestly didn't know anything about it. So it's a very non-fat book, but it's a project that I'm really excited about. And I'm actually at the point now when I can actually start writing because, 14 years of research has been actually a little bit longer than that, but I'm bubbling to get the story out and I can feel it rising to the surface. And I'm very excited about it, but I will always look at Fatizen as my entree into the writing world and to be part of the Fatisphere, to be part of the universe that, people can look at in terms of referencing, fat characters. And for any writers out there, we need more fat characters in literature. It's essential. Representation matters, as trite or cliche as that may sound. We need to see representation of who we are in literature. Characters that are worthwhile, characters that are not just out of some kind of erotica story. And there's nothing wrong with erotica. We all love it. But real hardcore literature characters that choose to be who they are, that push the narrative forward, that I am happy, you can be happy, and it's okay at the end of the day to want to have your cheesecake and to have a second slice. There is nothing wrong with being fat. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be fatter. You are free to be anything you want to be, regardless of what society has to say about it.
What an incredible episode this was. Honestly, I actually feel a little bit emotional talking about all these points because, and I said it before, reading Fatizen really brought up for me some feelings about feeling a sense of where we're at now and the direction that things can go, and the irony that it is a very dystopian future with so many camp elements of this revolution that goes on, and yet it feels so tangible and in our own lifetime. And I just want to say thank you for writing this, for presenting this. For the final time readers, I'm going to tell you, go and buy it, go and read it. We'll cover all that in the show notes and in a sec, but Phil, baby, this was incredible. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, gentlemen. I really love being here.
Where can our listeners find you online?
You can visit our website, which is embonpointpublishing.com. And there are links to all of our graphic novels. You can order our books from your local bookstore or just have them shipped to your home on Amazon. And if you have any questions, you can contact me via the website, which has an email address link.
Well, that is it for another fantastic week here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. Now, if you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at ThiccMouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or at our website at podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes, and you can always write to us at thethickradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stan and Thicky Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Body by Cream.